We all know the Piccadilly line, right? It's the dark blue tube line, runs from Cockfosters to Heathrow Airport and Uxbridge. If you're a regular viewer of this channel, you'll know that it opened on the 15th of December 1906, and it was originally called the Great Northern Piccadilly and Brompton Railway. But that was a mouthful, so everyone called it the Piccadilly Tube. But it goes further back than that. You see, the Piccadilly Tube is not one line, but four. So it all kind of begins in 1890, when the City and South London Railway opened as the first deep-level underground railway. This was a success. In fact, much of the original railway forms part of the Northern Line today. As so often happens when a technology turns out to actually work, there was a scramble to jump onto the bandwagon, and so the 1890s saw what I tend to call the Tube Mania. Many proposals for new lines were put forward in Parliament. The majority went nowhere, literally or figuratively. The people proposing them were more interested in making money than actually building a railway, and it showed. A couple did get built. The Central London Railway and the Waterloo and City Railway date from this era. There are some that would have failed were it not for this man, whom regular viewers will recognise as Charles Tyson Yerkes. Yerkes was a deeply suspect Chicago businessman with an interest in public transport, having made a lot of money in American streetcar lines. It's funny, when I talk about American lines, I always say streetcars instead of trams, and I don't know why that is. It doesn't make much sense. Anyway, the point is that Yerkes was a greedy businessman out to make his fortune, but unlike the rest, he knew how to actually get a railway built. So he bought a number of doomed proposals and made them work. One was the Baker Street and Waterloo Railway, now the Bakerloo, and another was the Charing Cross, Euston and Hampstead Railway, now another part of the Northern Line. And he also acquired 3 other doomed proposals and one pretty decent one, which he would rework into the Piccadilly Tube. I'm going to start somewhat illogically with the last one proposed, the Great Northern and Strand Railway. This was submitted in 1898, and permission was granted by Parliament in 1899. It would have run from Wood Green, what is now Alexandra Palace Station, to Stanhope Street, near the Strand. This line was actually backed by a main line company, the Great Northern Railway. The Great Northern ran trains out of King's Cross, but their commuter trains were overcrowded and their line was congested. The tube line would, they hoped, relieve some of that congestion. Therefore, the tube was to meet the main line at Wood Green, Hornsey, Haringey, Finsbury Park, Holloway and King's Cross, plus a stop at York Road. After King's Cross, it would dive towards the City and West End, with stations at Russell Square, Holborn and Strand. As well as relieving congestion, there was another good reason for following this route. Digging tube lines was an expensive and often controversial business. The owners of property up above had to be paid easement, a fee to allow the tube to pass beneath. If you've ever wondered why there are so many tortuous curves on the underground, that's why. By following the route of the main line, the Great Northern and Strand could minimise the amount they had to pay. And speaking of paying, they couldn't actually raise the capital to get it built. So that, for the time being, was that. Now we're going to skip back in time just a little to the Brompton and Piccadilly Circus Railway, authorised in 1897. This was to run from South Kensington to Piccadilly Circus, with additional stations at Brompton Road, Knightsbridge, Hyde Park Corner, Down Street and Dover Street. This was not actually a new idea by any means. As far back as 1872, different groups of speculators had tried to get railways built along this route. Opposition had always come from local residents who didn't like the idea of their lovely streets being dug up. Deep-level tubes were much less disturbing, both geographically and emotionally, and so this proposal got a lot further than the others. That being said, there was a rival proposal called the City and West End Railway, which would have run from Hammersmith to Cannon Street via Kensington and Piccadilly. However, the Brompton and Piccadilly Circus Railway had an ally, the District Railway. The District Railway's policy, unlike many Victorian railways, was to cooperate with other companies for mutual benefit. Unfortunately, the District were not friendly with the Central London Railway, who were backing the City and West End. It's all so complicated, isn't it? Anyway, The district had a station in South Kensington, and they could see the potential of having a connection to a railway into the West End proper. The Brompton and Piccadilly Circus, for their part, could benefit from the district's connection to the City of London and the suburbs in the west. Unfortunately, the Brompton and Piccadilly Circus also couldn't raise the capital to get their line built. If it failed, that meant that the City and West End Railway would likely get built instead, which would potentially put the Central London Railway right in the middle of the district's turf. Desperate to avoid this, the district bought the Brompton and Piccadilly Circus Railway out in 1899. But this wasn't the only interest the district had in deep-level tubes. Their main line, so to speak, ran into the City of London. Part of this was the Circle line, which they shared with the Metropolitan Railway. It was getting mighty busy. Therefore, they proposed a new line, a deep-level express tube. This would have run from Mansion House to Earl's Court with an intermediate stop at Charing Cross, the station now called Embankment. It was authorised in 1897. If you know the Underground, you may be wondering what this has to do with the Piccadilly line, which does not run to Embankment or Mansion House. Well, what's important about this is not where it would run, but how it would run. The district was steam-powered, which of course would not do for a deep-level tunnel. They weren't exactly sure how they would power their express line, but electricity was the most likely motive power. In the Act of Parliament authorising the line, there was a provision for electrifying the line and, almost as an afterthought, electrifying the rest of the district railway as well. This will become significant later. Once the district had the Brompton and Piccadilly Circus Railway, they decided to merge it with their express line, which made a lot of sense. They received authorisation for this, but to be honest, they seemed more interested in the Brompton and Piccadilly Circus than the express line. They were all about expanding their market. With that in mind, they applied for permission for extensions, which was not granted. One was from Brompton Road to Chelsea. Another, which is more relevant to this video, was from Piccadilly Circus to Russell Square. And here comes Charlie. I've been talking a lot about the district expanding and taking railways over, and I might have given the impression that they were a railway that was doing well financially. They were not. They had their proposals, but they didn't have the money to do anything with them. There were other rival schemes afoot. The City and West End Railway was one, and there was another called the Charing Cross, Hammersmith and District Railway. It was a tense time. If the district couldn't make their investment pay off, they were potentially ruined. And things were not looking good. A parliamentary select committee had been set up to wrangle all the different tube schemes, and the conclusion they came to was that the district's plans were the least desirable of all the proposals. What they favoured was a line that would run all the way from the west to northeast London, and the district's proposal wasn't it. The district didn't have money or support, but Yerkes could at least offer money, and he had the perfect foot in the door. Remember I mentioned that the district had permission to electrify their railway? Well, they had the permission, and Yerkes had the know-how. Or at least, employees who had the know-how. In 1901, he formed the Metropolitan District Electric Traction Company, with the purpose of electrifying the line. Of course, if he was going to electrify the line, he'd need control of it, and that same year he bought the district out. As for support, Yerkes and the district had a bit of luck come their way in 1901 when the rival schemes were late to submit their proposals. This bought Yerkes & Co. some time to get their act together. Swiftly they headed north. Remember the Great Northern and Strand Railway? Well, of course you do, it was only like 5 minutes ago. Well anyway, Yerkes sweet-talked them into a merger. It put him in a much stronger position with Parliament to extend the Brompton and Piccadilly Circus, and the Great Northern and Strand could finally get moving with some financial backing. Unfortunately, the Great Northern Railway, who you may recall had previously been cool with the Great Northern and Strand, got cold feet. They not only backed out, but demanded that the line go no further than Finsbury Park, lest it endanger their suburban trains. In 1902, competition in Parliament for the route from Kensington to central London was just as fierce. There was the City and West End again, but this time the Central London Railway had another line of their own planned. This was the Charing Cross, Hammersmith and District Railway. There was also the Piccadilly and City Railway. And an interesting new player had entered the game: London United Electric Railways. London United were a tram company, and trams had become hugely successful in recent years. But a lot of their popularity came from the fact that they were cheap, and they were viewed, therefore, in certain sections of society as being low class and undesirable. Certainly not the sort of thing they wanted in the upmarket streets of Kensington. So getting into the underground business was just the thing. LUER planned a line from Barnes to Charing Cross. They amended this after forming an alliance with another planned line, the Piccadilly City and North East London Railway. At Hyde Park Corner there would be an interchange between the two. You have to think that London United's scheme was probably quite unnerving for Yerkes. Remember that the entire basis of his empire was that he had started in trams, then transferred that expertise into underground lines. And here was London United planning to do exactly the same. But the game was shifting in Charles' favour. You may recall that Parliament wanted a line all the way from the west to the north-east of London. Well, the London United scheme was 2 lines. Close, but, as they say, no cigar. Meanwhile, all Yerkes was asking for was permission for a short stretch of line from Piccadilly Circus to Holborn, to connect 2 already authorised lines together, and run them as one. However, just to be sure, Yerkes bought London United in 1902. This became the 4th contributor to the Piccadilly line scheme. As an added bonus, the man from Chicago was back in the tram game. In November that year, the plans received approval. The remaining rivals either collapsed or withdrew, shaking their fists and cursing the name of Yerkes. And so the Great Northern and Strand, the Brompton and Piccadilly Circus, the District Express Line, and London United Electric Railways, by their parliamentary powers combined, became the Piccadilly Tube. There was one last addition, an extension to Hammersmith. As the district already ran there and London United had tram lines there, it was pretty simple to get this one through Parliament. Now all they had to do was, build it all. In 1906 the line opened, and in 1907 the last section was completed. That was the single-stop branch from Holborn to Aldwych, which was never very popular, but was authorised as part of the Great Northern and Strand. This was abandoned in 1994, and the station stands as a relic of those precursor railways. Riding the line today, it's hard to imagine the sheer chaos that led to its construction, the rivalries, the corporate politics, the aggressive takeovers, the devious dealings, and occasionally the sheer luck. In time, the Piccadilly line would end up going much further than even Yerkes anticipated. Why, these days, it's practically respectable. Well, I hope you enjoyed this quadripartite tale from the Tube. If you did, and your head isn't spinning from all those different companies and lines, please do consider leaving a like and perhaps subscribing for more. I'd like to thank my contributors on Ko-fi and Patreon. You are the financial backing to my moribund tube line. And I'll see you all again very soon for another tale from the Tube.